A story of a garden, perfect, peaceful, holy. A story of a creator, loving, righteous, omnipotent. But what if that garden was never a paradise? And the one who ruled it was never what he claimed to be? Because Eden wasn't freedom. It was a containment zone, a beautifully designed prison, wrapped in light, guarded by lies. You've been taught to worship the architect of that prison, to call him God. But what if the real truth was buried beneath centuries of fear, edited scriptures, and forbidden books? What if Eden was not the beginning of humanity's blessing, but the beginning of its captivity? The psychological trap of creation. Let's go back into the very first story ever told. In the beginning, it says, God created man in his image. He shaped Adam, placed him in a perfect garden, and gave him just one rule. Do not eat from that tree. It sounds simple, moral, clean. But hidden in that simplicity is the oldest form of control. The story you know is not theology. It's psychology, written to condition obedience. Because think about it. Why would an all-knowing, all-loving creator fear his creation gaining knowledge? Why warn a being you claim to love, do not seek understanding? That's not protection. That's censorship. This God didn't want children. He wanted subjects. And Eden was his laboratory. The counterfeit creator, according to ancient Gnostic texts buried for centuries, the being who made the world we see, was not the true source of divine light. He was a copy, a lower consciousness, a self-proclaimed god named Yaldabaoth, born from spiritual error, a shadow of divine power without wisdom. Yaldabaoth declared himself the only god because he couldn't comprehend the light beyond himself. He saw emptiness and mistook it for mastery. He looked into the void and said, I am God, and there is none beside me. But it wasn't truth speaking. It was fear. And from that fear came the material world, a construct built not from love, but from control. The Garden of Eden was not a gift. It was a simulation, a gilded cage for newly formed consciousness. Adam was not free. He was contained. His divine spark, the light of true creation, was buried deep inside flesh and memory. Humanity's first breath was its first imprisonment. The forbidden knowledge, and then came the command, do not eat from the tree of knowledge. Pause and let that echo. A God forbidding knowledge. A deity outlawing curiosity. What kind of creator fears the awakening of his own creation? The so-called forbidden fruit wasn't a test. It was a barrier, a firewall coded into consciousness. The tree wasn't about morality. It was about restriction. It was the boundary line between awareness and submission. And then, something happened. Something that changed everything. The serpent's whisper. They told you the serpent was evil. They told you he brought ruin. But the Gnostic texts tell another story. That the serpent was not a deceiver, but a messenger. A being of wisdom, a carrier of divine insight, sent to awaken what the false god tried to bury. That whisper to Eve wasn't temptation. It was revelation. You will not die. Your eyes will be opened. And when she reached out, when she tasted truth, the illusion cracked. She saw through the program. She recognized the cage. That was the moment humanity woke up. Not the fall, the awakening. But to Yaldabaoth, it was rebellion. His subjects had gained sight. The illusion of Eden had been broken. And so he panicked. He cast them out, not to punish them for disobedience, but to quarantine them from spreading awareness. The fall of man was never a tragedy. It was the first act of spiritual freedom, the war against awareness, but the story was rewritten. The liberator became the villain, the jailer became God, and the church, centuries later, built its empire on that twisted foundation. Knowledge became sin. Obedience became virtue. Curiosity became heresy. It was perfect social engineering. A system that teaches you from birth that you are broken, fallen, unworthy. And only through submission can you be saved. That's not salvation. That's programming. Every generation has been fed the same illusion. That suffering was your fault. That guilt is holiness. That the one who enslaves you is your savior. And behind it all, the counterfeit God feeding on worship. Sustained by fear, hiding behind the veil of religion. The architecture of control look closer at the structure of Eden itself. 4 rivers dividing the land, a perfect quadrate, a grid, a map. Not of paradise, but of containment. Adam wasn't created in Eden. He was placed there, inserted like data into a controlled environment. His role wasn't freedom, it was maintenance. Keep the garden, the command said. That's not liberty, that's labor. Eden was never open. It was fenced, monitored, and sealed with guards of flame. That's not the language of paradise. That's the language of a facility under lockdown. Even death was written into the code. If you eat, you will die. A built-in failsafe, a kill switch designed to trigger if consciousness breached the barrier. When Adam and Eve awakened, the system activated. Expulsion, quarantine, isolation. Not punishment. Protocol. The trees of power, 2 trees, stood at the center of this construct, the tree of life and the tree of knowledge. One permitted, one forbidden. That's not divine balance. That's manipulation disguised as choice. The tree of life was the loop, a symbol of eternal repetition, the recycling of souls trapped within the simulation. The tree of knowledge was the exit key, a code that could break the system and restore awareness. That's why it was forbidden. That's why it was guarded by fire, because if humanity accessed it, the illusion would collapse. When Eve ate the fruit, nothing exploded. The sky didn't fall. The truth simply revealed itself. And for the first time, humanity saw the feminine awakening. That's why Eve was blamed. That's why women throughout history were branded the source of sin. Because in the myth, the awakening began with her, the intuitive, the seeker, the receiver of hidden knowledge. In systems of control, the portal to truth must always be silenced. So the story was rewritten. Eve became the betrayer, the serpent became Satan, and curiosity became a curse. But beneath that rewriting lies the oldest truth. That consciousness, especially the intuitive kind, is the greatest threat to tyranny. The hidden war of faith, every empire since then has carried the same architecture. Walled gardens, forbidden knowledge, a God that demands worship through fear, and when voices rose to reveal the truth, they were branded heretics. The Gnostics, the mystics, the seekers. Their books were burned, their names erased, because they dared to say what the system couldn't survive hearing, that the God of this world is not the true source. The true divine is beyond the veil, beyond this simulation, beyond the material cage. It doesn't demand worship. It doesn't threaten punishment. It only calls you to remember. The erased scriptures in early centuries, dozens of sacred writings existed, Gospels of Thomas, Mary, Judas, and the secret book of John. Each one painted a very different picture. A cosmos of light beyond matter. A divine spark within every human soul. A story not of sin and shame, but of awakening and return. And what happened to them? Erased, buried, declared forbidden. Why? Because a humanity that remembers its divinity cannot be controlled. You can't sell salvation to someone who realizes they were never fallen. The great deception. This is why the narrative of Eden was inverted. Because if the serpent was the teacher, if Eve was the awakener, and if the garden was a cage, then the foundation of organized religion collapses. Fear would no longer work. Guilt would no longer sell, and worship would no longer feed the machine, so they fortified the myth. They turned the warden into the savior. They built cathedrals over prisons and painted control as devotion. Every ritual, every prayer to the false god strengthened the very system humanity was meant to escape. The awakening, but the memory can't stay buried forever. Every soul carries the echo of that moment, the taste of the fruit, the spark of knowing. It whispers from deep within you, reminding you of what you are, a fragment of infinite consciousness, temporarily asleep inside the dream of a lesser God. You were never born in sin. You were born in captivity, and awakening isn't rebellion, it's remembering. The serpent's whisper wasn't evil. It was the key. It said, "Open your eyes," and now that same call echoes again, through stories, through symbols, through time. The true apocalypse isn't destruction. It's revelation, the unveiling of truth long hidden beneath holy lies. So when you hear the story of Eden again, don't imagine a paradise lost. Imagine a prison escaped, a system cracked open by awareness, because the real sin wasn't disobedience. It was ignorance, and the real redemption wasn't found in kneeling, but in seeing, in daring to remember who you are. You were never fallen. You were forgotten. And now, you're waking up.